Well, when last we left Glastonbury, we were in anguished nerves upon which the great blunt thumb of evil was strumming its nightly gamut amid those sweet summer scents. Phrase I never get tired of. So here we are. Once more he listened intently. How hard not to listen. What was the trouble with the beast over there? What were they doing to it? What were he and Mary doing to Miss Drew? If only he knew that there was a God, for who for 1 second had an ear open. What things he would pour into that gasping, gaping, hairy, stupid orifice. Gaping, hairy, stupid orifice. That's what he's calling God here. In the old days, their gods made them sacrifices their enemies to propitiate? I don't know. I'm going to give up. The great pain engine. Propitiate? Propitiate. Whatever. It's been a long day, okay? I'll pull into old Gaird's head, he thought, to burn an image of God like a great Guy Fawkes when he has his festival of Christ's blood. He resumed his sentry's march. The suffering beast was silent now. He prayed that Miss Drew also was either rocking herself to sleep in a fit of hysterics or hardening her heart in pain-killing haste. But if everyone waited, he said to himself, to snatch their hour, till not a cry, a groan, a moan could be heard in the whole world, who would ever be happy? There, wasn't that the opening of the front door? No, 'twas one of those inexplicable noises that are liable to occur in all silent places, as though some ambushed eavesdropper struck something with his foot. What an awful mood Tom was in when I saw him yesterday. He doesn't seem to like it very much, our being married. Perhaps I ought to have asked him to the church. She said not to. Girls are wise in these things. Wise. There! That surely was the door. Yes, there are her steps. Oh, the darling. Oh, the heavenly darling. He snatched the bag from her hands and laid it on the ground, flinging his hazel stick after it. His whispers of rapture as he welcomed her, touched her there, here, with his hands, as if to make sure that it was she and none else, drifted off among the other faint sounds of the night, and went on their airy voyage eastward. The wind came from the west, so that, long after no human ear could have heard them, those sounds, of those vibrations that would have been sounds to more sensitive ears than man's, when journeying due east. Over the routes of West Pennard and East Pennard they went, over Dyhart and Milton Clevedon, over Cogleywood and Kingwood's Warren, over Monkton Doverhill and Dane's Bottom, till they left the West Country altogether, and was resolved into thin air somewhere beyond Stonehenge. But Mary soon made him pick up her bag and his stick and set off down Silver Street. I was within an ace, I tell you, of not coming tonight. In fact, I'd told her I wouldn't come, and it was quite decided, when, all suddenly, she changed her mind and became absolutely generous. She just made me come, John. She just made me. Poor old thing, he interjected at this point. And then he caught himself up. Damn it, my sweet, how self-complacent a person gets in a second when luck turns, but I can't help it. I've got you, I've got you, I've got you. Mary smiled to herself in the warm velvety darkness that hung, like a great priestly alb, around the masonry of St. John's Tower. For she said in her heart, how different women are from men. I suppose we all accept from our earliest childhood this tragic division between the happy and the unhappy. Men seem to discover it like a new light on things, and at once want to do something, or at least to make some grand sign of doing something. But she forgot Miss Drew herself when they reached that door in the lamp-lit silence of North Lode Street. John produced his latchkey. "Think if I'd forgotten it," he whispered. "Think if we'd had to ring and bring that woman down." And she remembered, as they ascended the 2 flights of stairs to their top floor, glancing with an almost guilty nervousness at the various doors they passed, how miserable she had been so many times on these stairs. She recalled the day when she had brought the tablecloth at Wallop's and had found Tom there and came away without even knocking. As she followed John now with her hand on the gaslit banisters and watched the ends of her gray flannel trousers clinging about his downtrodden heels, she wondered to herself why it was that he loved her now so much more than during these wretched months before the pageant. Those wretched months. Was it Tom's fault in those days, or Gerd's, or just the agitation of the pageant? "I don't understand him," she said to herself as they reached their own landing, "but I belong to him. I belong to him. He loves me more today than he loved me since the boat on the Wissy." Her feelings were a thrilling mixture of contradictions when they stood in the room at last, alone together and with the night before them. But they were all happy sensations, though so opposite. It was a delicious sense of a furtive, guilty assignation she had as she heard him lock the door behind her. But it was also a heavenly sense, as she looked around her, of being in a room she had made according to her own taste. For in Thorpe and Norwich it had just been Mary's bedroom, something she had accepted exactly as she had grown up to it. And of course, at Miss Drew's, everything belonged to the house. She felt also, and this was totally unexpected, a hot wave of shyness mounting up through her as she hesitated for a second to throw off her cloak. She pressed her knuckles quickly to her face before she looked round and prayed he wouldn't notice how burning her cheeks were. But he was snatching off her cloak now, and now he was standing back for a minute to gaze at her with adoration in her low white dress and bare arms and shoulders. "What a lovely sash," he whispered solemnly, and he seemed to be drinking her up with his eyes, just as if he were kneeling at her feet and she were the very cup at the altar. And then his hands, his lips, his very soul were pressed rapturously against her shoulders, her throat, her shy, cold breasts. The touch of her body began very soon to change this worship of her beauty into a more intense but less sacramental desire. His fingers began feverishly plucking at the fastenings of her bodice. But Mary remembered her careful, thought-out erotic diplomacy, and she slipped away from him. No, John. I'm going to undress behind our screen. That's what I brought it for, at Wallop's. It's my dressing room behind there, as well as my kitchen. You go and get quite ready for bed. Give me my bag, though. My nightgown's in there. Yes. Get into bed as quick as you like, and I'll turn out the gas." When John recalled every conscious moment of all this night, after she had left him on Monday, the thing that remained in his mind as most entrancing was the marbly smoothness of her body when he held her last. Being as queer as he had always been in his amorous peculiarities, and being as frantically fastidious as he was vicious, this small smoothness of Mary's flesh was a new experience to him. He hadn't exactly expressed her to be as scaly as a Grepton, or even as bony as old Tom was, but this heavenly smoothness was something quite unlooked for. And she was so docile, too. That was another surprise to him, for he'd expected, from what he had read in books, that she would be capricious, nervous, agitated, difficult. Yes, Mary was indeed docile. John was right in that. She, too, had surprises that night, and the greatest of all these was the sense of absolute naturalness and freedom from embarrassment. When she had felt that first rush of blood to her cheeks, she had thought to herself, "Mercy! I'm not going to be silly in that way, am I?" But when once she had turned out that gas flame, why, it was all as easy and nice as if it had been in the wheat field. It was nicer, in fact. For in place of that great mother's confederacy with her daughter's psychic ravishings, as she lay on the sun-warmed bank, here, in the Northload bed, with the water meadow scents coming in through the window, almost as if they came from her own Norfolk fens, there was about her an older, deeper, darker protection than even of the earth. Here there was about her the protection of the ancient night itself, oldest of all the gods, older than all the thrones, dominations, principalities, and powers that brood over Glastonbury, older than any holy grail. And Mary thought to herself, because I have found my love, and because I have come to belong to my love, I will bear now, without making a fuss, whatever chance may give me to bear. I will think of what I feel now, pure gratitude, and I'll be sweeter to Miss Drew than anyone in all her days has been. And John thought to himself, I wish I could get old Tom's troubles out of my mind. I wish I'd stirred up the mare a bit more to make things easier for Tom at the factory. I wish I hadn't asked him to come to the church. I wish I'd seen more of him lately. I've just dropped old Tom. I've just forgotten him, neglected him, let him slide out of my mind. And as John lay there, discovering in the smoothness of Mary's limbs something that was as surprising to him as if he'd found a white seaweed or a blue wood anemone, his shame about neglecting Tom became like a bruise, a definite bruise in some back ledge of his consciousness. I must accept it, he said to himself, and he began to think, as he slowly sank to sleep. The girl was asleep at last, an hour before he was, at least an hour. That the only morality he possessed was a feeling of shame whenever he allowed himself to cry out, I am miserable, I am unhappy, I am wretched. Not to pity himself, whatever happened, and not to be miserable, whatever happened. Such was John's morality. To allow himself to go to sleep feeling distressed about Tom would have been a lapse from his interior code of honor. As he heard St. John's clock strike 2, he gathered himself together within himself in a curious habit gesture of the will. This gesture he always thought of in a peculiar way, using a special image for it. The image he used for it was a certain kind of black traveling trunk studded with brass nails. Such a trunk he had once seen on a barge on the Seine. A man, a young working man, was sitting upon it. And it was from this lad's expression that John had derived this particular symbol of refusing whatever happened to be unhappy, which constituted in his own mind the only morality. At the first temptation to such weakness, as at this very moment, when he was tempted to stay awake worrying about old Tom, he would make this habitual gesture of the will and visualize the black trunk with brass knobs. It was a further proof of how women received the tragedies of them with a more vegetable-like acceptance than men, that while Mary went to sleep in at 1:30 full of a delicious sense of fulfillment, John found it very difficult, in spite of his black trunk with brass nails, to get the troubles of Tom Barter out of his mind. No doubt a large part of this difference between them lay in the fact that Mary was much less nervous about sleeping with John than John was about sleeping with Mary. Being one layer of one skin, so to say, nearer nature than he. Her love for him saturated her deeper identity more completely than his for her, so that the contact of strange flesh, strange at least under these new conditions, was much less of a nervous shock to her, for all her greater receptivity, than it was to him. His deeper soul had not really yet accepted this new experience, so that while her love made it possible for her to fall into a childlike sleep of absolute peace and security, John stayed awake for some while longer, worrying about Tom, and when he did sleep, it was a sleep less deep than hers. But before the church clock had struck another hour, both of the cousins were fast wrapped in unconsciousness in that little Northlode room. And the wandering mists from the water meadows of the Isle of Glass, floating in and out of their open window, renewed their strength as they slept. For these airs carried with them a far-off, dim remembrance of the vaporous summer mists that at this very moment were rising from Dye's Hole, and from Oxborough Ferry, and from the great pool at Harold's Mill, where the personality of Tom Barter had first risen up between them. Okay, well, that chapter is over. Whew, thank God. That was chapter Idolatry. Next chapter is Tin, just T-I-N, Tin. That's a short one, I think, for this book at least. We're on page 649 now. So I'll see you next time in Glastonbury. Cheers.